Welcome to Life Stories, where extraordinary tales of love, resilience, and hope come to life. In today's story, we follow Andrew Carter, a man whose life was shattered when his young daughter vanished without a trace. 2 decades later, a chance encounter at a bank reignites his search for the truth, leading to a journey filled with unexpected revelations, emotional confrontations, and a bond that defies the odds. What begins as a moment of curiosity unfolds into a powerful story of redemption and healing. Subscribe to Life Stories now to begin today's unforgettable journey. It had been years since I had walked into a bank like that. Most of my wealth was managed through intermediaries, faceless transactions, and polished professionals taking care of my affairs. Yet, for reasons I couldn't quite articulate, something compelled me to handle this matter personally. Perhaps it was the restless night before, the weight of a recurring dream that always began in sunlight and ended in shadows. Or maybe it was simply intuition, though I hadn't trusted mine in decades. The bank's sterile fluorescent lights reflected coldly off the polished tile floors, casting a hollow glow over the rows of counters and cubicles. It was a far cry from the warmth I felt when I last stood in a place like this with purpose, when life felt fuller, not dulled by years of searching and sorrow. I adjusted my tie as I approached the counter, trying to push aside the heavy thoughts that had followed me here. The young woman behind the glass barely looked up as I slid my documents forward. Her fingers tapped quickly on the keyboard. And for a moment, I was just another customer. Then, as if realizing I was still standing there, she glanced up with a polite smile. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark hair neatly pulled into a sleek ponytail. Her name tag read Emily Davis. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. I'll need just a moment to process this," she said, her tone courteous but detached. I nodded slightly, distracted by the noise of the room, phones ringing, the faint hum of printers, but it wasn't the atmosphere that captured my attention. As my gaze drifted toward her neck, my breath caught. There, dangling delicately against her skin, was a small golden pendant. For a second, it felt as though the world had tilted. That pendant, I knew it as well as I knew my own hands. It was identical to the one I had given my daughter, Emily, before she disappeared 20 years ago. My heart skipped a beat, then raced, the rhythm erratic as the image seared itself into my mind. "Is something wrong, Mr. Carter?" the woman asked, her brows furrowing slightly. I realized I must have been staring too long. I forced a smile, though my throat felt tight. "That's a beautiful necklace you're wearing," I said, striving for casualness though my voice betrayed me with a slight quiver. "Where did you get it?" She glanced down at the pendant and brushed it absently with her fingers, as if it were a part of her she rarely noticed but always carried. "Oh, this. It was a gift from my grandmother. I've had it for as long as I can remember," she replied, her tone light, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my expression neutral as emotions churned in my chest. A gift from her grandmother. Could it be a coincidence? Perhaps there were hundreds of necklaces like that in the world. But no, my mind argued. This was too specific, too exact. The pendant was one of a kind, a handcrafted piece my late wife had commissioned for our daughter's 4th birthday. "It's lovely," I murmured, barely able to form the words. My thoughts raced as I replayed that day over and over in my mind, the last time I had seen Emily. She had been so full of life, her blonde curls bouncing as she played in the yard. That necklace, resting against her small chest, had caught the sunlight as she twirled, laughing. And then, in an instant, she was gone. The young woman behind the counter handed back my documents with a polite smile, signaling the end of our brief interaction. "Is there anything else I can assist you with today?" I shook my head, my voice failing me. No, that'll be all. Thank you." Walking out of the bank felt like moving through molasses. My legs were heavy, my chest tight. The bustling city street outside was a blur of noise and movement. But all I could see was that pendant. My mind refused to let it go. Could it be hers? Could this young woman be connected to my daughter? The questions twisted into a knot of hope and dread. One I hadn't felt in years. I had buried that hope long ago. It was dangerous. I'd learned. Hope could lift you to impossible heights. But it could also leave you shattered when you fell. Back home, I sat in my dimly lit study, staring at the flickering flames in the hearth. The warmth did nothing to thaw the cold anxiety gripping me. I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out the last photograph I had of Emily, taken just a week before she disappeared. In it, her blue eyes sparkled with joy, her laughter almost audible through the still image. Around her neck was the pendant. Unmistakable. I traced its outline in the photo with trembling fingers. The weight of 2 decades pressing down on me. The necklace had been a gift from her grandmother, my late wife's mother. I had never imagined it would resurface like this. Worn by a stranger whose name was the same as my daughter's. The coincidence was impossible to ignore, yet terrifying to acknowledge. Could this woman, Emily Davis, really be connected to my Emily? Or was this another cruel trick of fate, dangling hope just out of reach? Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, the image of the necklace looping endlessly in my mind. Memories of the day Emily disappeared clawed their way to the surface, her laughter echoing in the yard. The sun warm on her golden curls. And then the silence that followed. The police had searched tirelessly. The media had plastered her face everywhere. But no answers had come. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. By morning, I knew what I had to do. This was no mere coincidence. I needed to know who Emily Davis was and how she had come into possession of that necklace. If there was even the faintest chance that she was connected to my daughter, I had to find out. The morning sun filtered weakly through my study window as I sat at my desk, staring at the photo of Emily in my hands. The golden pendant in the photograph seemed to glimmer in the light, almost taunting me. My mind was racing with possibilities, none of which I could ignore. After 2 decades of dead ends, this pendant was the first glimmer of a connection, and I was determined not to let it slip through my fingers. I knew I couldn't do this alone. My first call was to Daniel Harper, an old friend and a private investigator who had once helped me search for Emily. He had been there through the initial days of chaos and heartbreak, combing through every possible lead, only to come up empty-handed. I hadn't spoken to him in years, after the search had gone cold. It was too painful to keep reaching out. But now, I needed him again. Daniel answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was steady, familiar, and tinged with cautious concern. "Andrew, it's been a while. What's going on?" I hesitated, the weight of my emotions making it hard to speak. "Daniel, I think I've found something. Or someone." His tone sharpened. "What do you mean?" I explained everything: the bank, the clerk, the necklace, and the uncanny resemblance to the one Emily had worn the day she disappeared. Daniel didn't interrupt, letting me pour out the story in its entirety. When I finished, he said, "You're sure about the pendant?" "I'm certain," I replied, my voice firm. "It's the same one. It has to be." There was a pause on the other end of the line before he spoke again. "All right, Andrew. I'll dig into it. Send me whatever details you have about this woman, her name, where she works. I'll get started right away." Relief flooded through me, though it was tempered by the heavy knot of anxiety in my chest. Daniel's competence was unquestionable, but I knew this investigation would stir up old wounds. Still, I had no choice. If there was even a sliver of a chance that Emily Davis was connected to my daughter, I had to follow it. The hours that followed were agonizing. I tried to distract myself with work, but my mind kept wandering back to the necklace, the photograph, and the haunting thought that after all these years, I might finally be close to an answer. It was a dangerous thought. Hope was a double-edged sword, and I'd been cut by it too many times before. That evening, Daniel called back. His voice was brisk. All business. I've started digging. The woman's name is Emily Davis. Age 25. She's been living in New York City for the past 5 years. No criminal record. No red flags. But here's the interesting part, her history before the age of 18 is vague. No clear school records or anything substantial. I frowned, gripping the phone tighter. What do you mean? Vague. Her parents passed away when she was young, and she was raised by her grandmother. But there's very little information about her early years. She moved around a lot, which might explain the gaps, but it's unusual. I also looked into the grandmother. Her name is Martha Davis. She's still alive, living in a quiet suburb a couple of hours outside the city. My heart pounded. And the necklace? I haven't found anything concrete yet, but I'm planning to visit Martha tomorrow. If anyone can shed light on how Emily got that pendant, it'll be her. Good, I said, my voice firm despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. Let me know the moment you find anything. After hanging up, I sat in silence, staring at the photograph of my daughter. Could it really be possible that this young woman was connected to her? The timeline fit. The necklace fit. But the answers were still just out of reach, teasing me with their proximity. The next day stretched on endlessly as I waited for Daniel's update. By mid-afternoon, he finally called. His tone was measured, but I could sense the gravity of what he was about to say. I just spoke to Martha Davis, he began. She confirmed that she gave the necklace to Emily when she was a little girl. But here's the thing, Martha admitted that it wasn't originally hers. She said the necklace was passed down from Emily's mother. My chest tightened. And Emily's mother? Her name was Rebecca Davis. She died when Emily was 4 years old, the same age your daughter disappeared. But there's something strange. When I pressed Martha for more details, she got defensive. She admitted that Emily's early years were complicated, but she refused to elaborate. And when I asked about Emily's father, she shut down completely. She only said that he was out of the picture before Emily was born. I leaned back in my chair, my mind reeling. The parallels were too strong to ignore: the age, the pendant, the evasiveness surrounding Emily's past. It all pointed to something bigger, something far more significant than mere coincidence. There's no official record of Emily's father? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. None that I could find. Daniel confirmed. But there's definitely something Martha isn't telling us. I have a feeling it's important. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My thoughts were a jumble of hope, fear, and desperation. I need to meet this girl, I finally said, my voice firm. I need to know if she's really my Emily. Daniel hesitated. Andrew, we need to be careful. We can't just barge in with accusations. This is delicate. Let me keep digging. If we approach this the wrong way, we could lose whatever chance we have of finding the truth. I understood his caution. But patience had never been my strong suit. Not when it came to Emily. Do whatever you have to do, Daniel, I said. But I'm not waiting much longer. After hanging up, I sat in my study, the weight of the past 2 decades pressing down on me. The image of the necklace, the name Emily, and the gaps in her history, all of it felt like a puzzle. And for the first time in years, I was on the verge of solving it. The question was whether I was ready for the truth. Whatever it might be. The morning air was crisp as I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone. My mind raced with possibilities, some hopeful, others devastating. Daniel's call had left me restless, the unanswered questions swirling like a storm. Emily Davis was a name and a face now tied irrevocably to the memories of my daughter, Emily Carter. Yet, nothing was certain, and the weight of ambiguity was unbearable. The thought of her, the woman with the golden pendant, haunted me. If she truly had no idea of the necklace's origins, then her life, like mine, might have been built on a foundation of lies. I thought of her polite demeanor, her calm professionalism, and wondered if beneath it all, she felt the same sense of incompleteness that had plagued me for 2 decades. But that was speculation. I needed facts. I needed to see her again. Daniel's voice echoed in my mind, "We need to tread carefully. Don't rush in without proof." But caution had never been my strength. I was a man of action. And this wasn't just a business deal, it was my daughter's life. The hours stretched into eternity as I wrestled with the decision. But by late afternoon, my resolve was firm. I couldn't wait. Not anymore. The next day, I walked back into the bank, my heart pounding with every step. The polished floors, the hum of the air conditioning, the scent of fresh paper, it all seemed sharper. As if the world had turned up the volume on reality. I scanned the room, and there she was, seated at the same counter, her dark hair gleaming under the harsh lights. Emily Davis. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I approached. When she looked up and saw me, her expression shifted briefly to one of surprise before her professional smile returned. "Good morning, Mr. Carter. How can I help you today?" For a moment, I faltered. The words I had rehearsed dissolved into a jumble in my mind. But then I saw the pendant again, glinting softly against her skin, and it fueled my determination. "Emily," I said, my voice tighter than I intended, "I need to speak with you. Privately." Her brow furrowed, the smile fading into mild confusion. "Of course," she said after a pause, gesturing toward a small conference room nearby. I followed her, the sound of my shoes against the tiles echoing in my ears. Inside the room, she closed the door and turned to face me, her hands clasped in front of her. "Is everything all right, Mr. Carter?" I hesitated, the gravity of the moment settling over me. "I'm not sure," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "But I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me." Her confusion deepened, but she nodded. "All right. That necklace," I began, pointing to the pendant. "Where exactly did you get it?" She glanced down at the pendant, her fingers brushing over it instinctively. "Like I told you before, it was a gift from my grandmother. She gave it to me when I was little." I leaned forward slightly, my heart pounding. "Did she ever tell you where she got it? Or who it belonged to before you?" Emily frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the intensity of my questions. "No, she didn't. She just said it was important. A family keepsake. I never really thought much about it." My chest tightened. I wanted to believe her, needed to, but my mind was screaming for answers. "Emily," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "that necklace is identical to the one my daughter was wearing the day she disappeared." She froze, her eyes widening in shock. "Your daughter," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. "Her name was Emily too. She was 4 years old when she vanished. That pendant, it was a gift from her grandmother, my late wife's mother. I haven't seen it in 20 years. Until now." For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Emily stared at me, her face pale and her hands shaking as they clutched the necklace. "Mr. Carter, I don't know what to say. This is a lot to take in." "I know," I said, my voice softening as I saw the fear and confusion in her eyes. "And I'm sorry to put this on you. But I need to know. Do you remember anything about your early years? Anything about where you came from?" She shook her head slowly, her expression clouded with uncertainty. "Not much. My grandmother raised me. And my mom died when I was really young. I don't have many memories of her. It's all kind of blurry." I felt a pang of sorrow as I watched her struggle with the weight of my questions. "Emily," I said gently, "if there's even the slightest chance that you could be my daughter, we need to find out. Will you let me? Will you take a DNA test?" Her eyes filled with tears as she looked at me, torn between disbelief and the possibility of answers she hadn't even known she was seeking. Finally, She nodded. Okay, she said, her voice barely audible. Let's do it. As I left the bank that day, my emotions were a whirlwind. I was closer than ever to the truth. Yet the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. The DNA test would be definitive. But the questions that loomed, the why, the how, would not be answered so easily. Still, for the first time in 20 years, I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Hope that this young woman might not just be a stranger with a familiar necklace, but my Emily, my daughter. As the sun set over the quiet garden, Andrew and Emily sat side by side, their bond stronger than words could express. The journey to this moment had been one of pain, loss, and unimaginable revelations. But it had also been a story of hope and resilience. Emily was no longer a stranger with a familiar pendant, she was his daughter, the missing piece of his soul. Together, they had begun to unravel the tangled threads of the past, finding strength in each other. Justice had been served, and while it couldn't erase the years they had lost, it brought a sense of closure. Now, Andrew and Emily looked forward to a future built on understanding and love, a chance to create new memories and heal the scars left behind by time and circumstance. As Andrew reached over to hold Emily's hand, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in decades. We can't change the past, he said softly, but we can shape the future. Emily smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. And we will, together. If you were touched by this story of love, resilience, and family, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more incredible tales that inspire and move us all. See you in the next video.